British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is set to meet with US President Joe Biden later this Friday to discuss whether to let Kyiv use long-range missiles against Russia. In recent weeks, Kyiv has repeatedly urged its key allies to lift the current restriction, with Moscow now saying that a U-turn on the issue would effectively mean that NATO was at war with Russia. Shirley Sitbon has the full story.
President Volodymyr Zelensky could have said the exact same words. The Polish foreign minister pleaded on Thursday for NATO countries to allow Ukraine to fire missiles they have provided to Kyiv into Russian territory. What used to be a red line for Ukraine's allies could soon get a green light.
Rockets that hit civilian targets in Ukraine are being shot by the bombers from the territory of Russia. These bombers take off from the airports on Russian territory. The victim of the aggression has the right to protect himself.
For President Vladimir Putin, though, if NATO allows Ukraine to fire missiles that its members produced into Russia, then NATO countries will be at war with Russia, with everything that entails. Putin says that in order to use sophisticated Western missiles, Ukraine will need Western soldiers.
This will mean the direct participation of the NATO countries, the United States, and European countries in the Ukraine war. It significantly changes the very essence, the very nature of the conflict.
This risk of an escalation has led the U.S. to examine various options, which the U.K. Prime Minister has arrived to discuss with President Biden. The most likely one, according to U.S. and British media, is to maintain the ban on the use of U.S.-produced weapons against targets in Russia, but to authorize the use of long-range missiles made by its allies, the U.K. and France.
Well, for more, we can bring in our correspondent in Ukraine, Francis Farrell. Just how closely will Ukraine be watching what goes on between Biden and Starmer this Friday?
So it's difficult to underestimate and understate how important this is for Ukrainians, strategically and symbolically. It's something that the country, the leadership, and the people have been asking for since the very beginning of the full-scale war, to be able to defend itself and fight back against Russia without one hand tied behind their backs. And now, obviously, with increased frequency of Russian long-range attacks against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, this plea has just gone louder and louder, and now Ukrainians are certainly crossing their fingers for the ability to fight properly back against Russia to be finally granted.
Now, on the field, meanwhile, Russia says it's recaptured a portion of territory in its western Kursk region after, of course, Ukraine launched a lightning incursion over a month ago. What more can you tell us about that Russian counter-offensive as it currently stands?
So facts from the ground that can be verified independently are still few and far between. We know that Russia claimed to have captured 10 settlements back in Kursk Oblast from Ukrainian control, but Ukraine still hasn't commented. Zelensky has said that they know that the attack was coming and everything's still going to plan. Overall, according to independent information that we have, it seems that they have taken some territory back, and it has been carried out by some of Russia's more elite units. But for the moment, it's not a game changer in terms of Ukraine's hold on Kursk Oblast. We'll have to keep our eye on it.
Francis Farrell reporting from Donetsk in Ukraine. Thank you very much. Well, for yet more on this story, we can bring in now Dr. Gavin Hall, an expert on NATO. He's also a teaching fellow in political science and international security at the University of Strathclyde. Thank you so much for joining us here on Around the World today. Now, Putin has described letting Ukraine use long-range missiles against Russian territory as a red line. What exactly should we understand this red line to signify?
Hello, well, good afternoon. First of all, I think it should be clear that there have been various other red lines that Vladimir Putin has drawn since 2022, which have been breached and crossed at various points in opportunity with only sort of limited responses. In the sort of framing, if you like, of this as a red line, it's clear that obviously Putin doesn't want Ukraine to be able to use particularly the UK French-made Storm Shadow missiles because of their capability to damage infrastructure within Russia itself. But what he's really trying to do is to effectively create some sort of divide and dispute within Ukraine's allies over how to proceed in the war. So there's some form of discord, disunity, which challenges the cohesion that's out there. It's probably picked on this particular moment and day because we've got the UK US summit at the moment with a new UK government in place. We know that we're going to be having a budget upcoming. We're going to be having a strategic defence review. So any little bit that can potentially influence how these transpire and ultimately potentially lower funding being made available is something that Putin will see as being advantageous. In terms of what the potential response to crossing this red line be, probably the most extreme version would be Russia choosing to arm what it would frame as Western adversaries, particularly countries like Iran, who are also supplying Hamas, Hezbollah and things, and have their own sort of agenda there.
So in your opinion, we don't think that Russia is really prepared to declare war on NATO if this new red line is crossed?
No, because that would be something that would require a response to take place, and that response ultimately wouldn't be beneficial to Russia or Russia's goals and things. It's maintained there as a sort of threat, and in a way, it's worked and enables Russia to re-establish some form of deterrence because it's enabling the United States to say, well, we're not going to allow our weapons to be used. So sort of trying to manage the level of the increased level of conflict that's taking place there. So there is some form of restraint that Russia is able to force the Western allies, particularly the US, to take, which they may not want to.
Well, picking up on what you just said, British media today is reporting that Joe Biden, of course, wary of provoking a nuclear or possibly nuclear conflict, is ready to let Ukraine deploy British and French missiles using US technology, but not US-made missiles themselves. How important is that distinction, both for the US and for Moscow?
It's pretty much a technical distinction that allows the US to sort of maintain this image of, hey, we're just providing aid and assistance. We're not actually involved in this conflict. However, in reality, they are involved to a certain degree in things, but more it enables Russia in a way to try and focus on painting the United Kingdom as being a prominent supporter of Ukraine, being a sort of one of the main bad actors, if you like, that's helping Ukraine to act. We've seen this morning 6 UK diplomats have had their accreditation removed and are going to be kicked out of Moscow for allegedly engaging in subversive activity, was the phrase, which is pretty much sort of what happened during the Cold War. Something would happen, both sides would expel others' diplomats. So there are different ways that Russia can choose to respond and how this can develop, which are well below the nuclear potential.
Now, it's likely that Starmer and Biden's meeting today in Washington will be their last meeting before an election, a US election, that could seriously upend US policy on Ukraine. What would be, in your opinion, the biggest impact of a Trump administration on Ukraine's war effort?
Well, that's a pretty sizable question. During Trump's administration, 2016 to 2020, obviously he made lots of rhetoric and came out with lots of statements. However, what he said versus what his administration actually did generally didn't align particularly well. Indeed, he might have argued, we're going to lessen defence spending, we're going to lessen our influence in Europe, but in reality, his administration actually increased. So Trump is someone who uses rhetoric to enhance negotiating positions rather than necessarily being what exactly he'll do.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but Dr. Gavin Hall, expert on NATO and teaching fellow in political science and international security at the University of Strathclyde, thank you.
Thank you.